What family secret was finally spilled in your family? My aunt didn't lose her teaching job due to budget cuts like she'd always claimed. Turns out she had never had a valid teaching license to begin with, regularly had affairs with the dads, and embezzled PTA money. My great-grandpa raped his daughter, his sons killed him. That my dad's little sister wasn't really his little sister. It was his sister's baby, raised by his mom. The girl didn't know until she was 21. My great-aunt was a nurse supervisor at a mental hospital in the 1920s. She fell in love with a guy who was being evaluated for a murder trial. She helped him escape and they went to Florida. But the police caught up with them. My aunt got off easy, but he got the electric chair. I found all this in a newspaper archives while working on family history. Showed it to my mom and she admitted it was all true. My great-great-grandfather was killed by my great-great-grandmother because she was having an affair with the sheriff and my grandfather said he was going to kill the sheriff. My grandmother shot him in the street and everyone assumed it was the sheriff. There was no proof and no witnesses, so no one was ever charged with his murder. My grandmother told my great-aunt on her deathbed. Also, after all of her children had passed away. She said she still loved the sheriff. And would have done it again. Side note. The sheriff died from a fall the next summer, so after all that happened, my grandmother, she spent the rest of her life unmarried. She was 102 when she died. My mother was Catholic. After 8 kids she would go visit family when she got pregnant. The Catholic Church would take the baby and rehome it with a barren Catholic family. I met a Greek Catholic brother. He looked like all of us but had a Greek name and Greek parents. My uncles are infamous criminals who killed multiple people. I thought they bred dogs. My mother is kid 7 of 10. My aunt kid 4, who was born in 1945, did her DNA and found out that she has a different father from everyone else. She was devastated. There was always rumor that there was an affair but nobody talked about it. She has so many questions but nobody's alive to answer her. We found out after my grandfather died that none of his 7 children with my grandmother were his, and that they all likely had different fathers. My uncle was a cop. My father was a mid-level drug kingpin. He basically ran the marijuana psychedelics trade in a small city. When I was a kid, my uncle died in the line of duty. There was a big funeral and everything. Turns out he wasn't killed in the line of duty. The cops found out that my father was paying him for cop information. When he was accused, my uncle ate a gun in his squad car in a parking lot. I found out 30 years later. My sister and I found out in our mid-late 20s that we had a full-on brother. Our dad got our mom pregnant in high school, and cause it was the 60s, it was all hush-hush, and she went to do her senior year with family and just quietly came back to town. They ended up getting together for real in college and no one knew, not their lifelong friends or even my uncle. Our brother had a good childhood with his adoptive family, but he was always curious about his birth mother, so he wrote her a letter. He sure was surprised to also come to meet his dad and 2 sisters. Crazy thing is, he didn't live too far away and we all look extremely alike. Would have been weird if we'd have bumped into each other otherwise. When my parents got married, it was because my mom got pregnant with my brother. That's not the secret, everybody has always known that. Mom's parents practically kicked her out of the house. My dad had already left for the Air Force, he had to fly back for a quickie wedding after basic. This was the early 1960s, so still a bit scandalous. Mom ended up moving in with her new in-laws so she could finish her last year of college before joining my dad in Texas and later Japan. 20-some years later, everyone was preparing for my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. Mom's parents, the ones who kicked her out for getting pregnant without being married. My grandma got real upset and said, "We can't celebrate 50, we've only been married 49 years. This was a shock to everyone because my mom's oldest brother was 50. Turns out if they had gotten married, my grandpa would have been kicked out of high school, so they hid the pregnancy baby until he graduated. After enough time had passed, they just told everyone the earlier date. Even though they did the exact same thing, they couldn't bring themselves to show any sympathy for their own daughter in that situation. I have half brothers and sisters from the women my father raped. A survivor's daughter told me some, ancestry and 23andMe did the rest. We found out Grandma's secret ingredient was actually just store-bought marinara sauce. Our family dinners will never be the same. At age 43 I learned I had a half-sister. My father had an affair and she was conceived after my brother was born, but before I was. She reached out to me, and is a lovely human. We have been in contact ever since, have traveled together, and I have visited her several times. My de facto uncle, he and my aunt never married but have been together since well before I was born, with a few hiccups has a child with another woman. It became common knowledge when the girl was 6 and was starting to understand the situation. At first it was a bit scandalous, but she's been welcomed with open arms by my entire family, including her half-siblings' maternal grandparents. She's treated the same as all the other kids her age. Her half-sister, my cousin, has a daughter the same age and they're best friends, go to the same high school, totally inseparable, technically aunt and niece, haha. She comes to all our family events and she's an awesome kid, we're all stoked to have her in our family. My great-great-grandfather was a huge financial success in the 1920s, owned a bunch of businesses, pillar of the community type, half the town worked for him. Built himself a huge mansion at the edge of town with all the modern conveniences. Lost everything in the stock market crash of the Great Depression, went out on his front porch, sat in a chair and blew his head off with a shotgun. Everybody was involved in covering it up, not just the family, but the local authorities and the newspapers too. His obituary even said that he had died of natural causes, though the whole town knew better. It was passed down as legend for generations that he had died young of natural causes, though no one ever mentioned why the family was suddenly poor. I found an entry in my great-grandmother's diary long after she had passed where she wrote about the whole episode. One of my adult cousins killed herself last year, and in her suicide note accused her father of molesting her since she was a child. And that's the start of the story. We did an ancestry DNA test, and found out my dad has a half-sister. Turns out Grandpa had been seeing her mother on the side for probably more than a decade, and also had at least one other long-term affair.